Hello, my name is Shannon Seymour, and I'm a psychologist at the Wellness Center. This is a presentation on understanding maternal and infant mental health. It's actually delivered in two parts. This is part two with an emphasis on infant mental health. So if you haven't seen part one, then I encourage you to go back and watch that at some point. It covers the information related to prenatal and perinatal mental health. I'm just going to give a quick introduction. Dr. Chelsea Walton is a clinical psychologist with a keen interest in perinatal mental health. She delivers the first part of this two-part series, and so I just wanted to give a quick introduction to her. As if you jump on the first video, you'll be seeing her. This is me, Shannon Seymour. I'm the director of the Wellness Center, and have a keen interest in infant mental health and child development. And so Dr. Walton and I decided to put this presentation together a couple of months ago and decided it would be good to record it in two separate videos just so it's a little bit smaller for people to be able to get through. So I hope that it's meaningful and provides you with some good information. So in Dr. Walton's first part, she's going to look at sort of the history of maternal mental health as a discipline, some key definitions, what are some perinatal mental health symptoms, and then what is treatment for somebody that's experiencing difficulty during pregnancy, postnatally, in terms of, what is helpful and what are some of the positive outcomes that we're striving for in treatment. And I'm going to cover today in my presentation an overview of infant mental health. It's often a topic that people are a little bit puzzled by. We don't think of babies having mental health problems, so we're going to explain really what it means in terms of the concept of infant mental health and the discipline and the research that is being forged in this area. We're going to look at key concepts and why infant mental health is really important. We're going to look at the role of the caregiver and how that impacts the mental health of an infant and the reciprocal nature of that in terms of the parent or the caregiver, and what healthcare and early childhood educators can do. So I'm not sure what's brought you to this topic or this presentation today, but if you are a healthcare provider or an early childhood educator, there's going to be a little bit of extra information for you. So really, this is kind of, I guess, the roadmap of human life, right? Pregnancy is the beginning of life for all mammals. We sort of then, come to this point of prenatal mental health, perinatal mental health, infant mental health, resilient children, healthy adults. I mean, that's the ultimate end of our journey, right? Is that we would be healthy, functioning, adaptive, flexible, confident adults. And so we're going to focus on some of the really key things in this really critical period of human development, which is this perinatal period and also this sort of infant mental health period, and hopefully leave you as excited about this stuff as we are. So infant mental health, like I said, is a topic that sometimes people are a bit puzzled. They're sort of like, we think of mental health when we think of mental health problems. And I think that's a bit of the trick, is that often we hear infant mental health and we immediately think, well, what kind of mental health problems can an infant have? And we can look at problems. We can look at ruptures in relationships. We can look at difficulties in infancy and early childhood. But more importantly, we want to look at what we know helps to build a thriving infant. What is it that we know about healthy brain development? What is it that we know about meeting baby's needs, attachment, so that baby has good mental health, good capacity to cope, soothe, calm, learn, explore, and connect to their environment. So infant mental health is a multidisciplinary science that bore out of theories of attachment, child development, learning, neuroscience, psychiatry, early childhood education, nursing, and pediatrics. And so there's a great deal of overlap in the field of infant mental health because there's a lot of people that are involved, and there's a lot of core disciplines that intersect in infancy. And so it really comes out of sort of multidisciplinary science, which is what I really love about it. It's very rich and robust in terms of its application and in terms of the ways in which it can impact healthcare and systems of care. It really sort of made its first appearance as a discipline in 1980, and that was with the founding of the World Association for Infant Psychiatry. And initially, it was looking really sort of from a psychiatric lens, and it was the field of psychiatry that sort of started this path of wanting to really understand what is it in infancy that sets in motion mental health risk factors or protective factors that often seem to carry through into adulthood. In 1985, the World Association for Infant Psychiatry and Allied Disciplines came on board. So they expanded their name, they expanded their reach, their scope of practice, and they also expanded sort of those people that they brought in to the field to contribute to its development and its expansion. And then in 1982, it became what is now known as WAME, which is the World Association of Infant Mental Health. And it really sort of then said, this doesn't just encompass psychiatry, this is all of these things that we talked about. And so they broadened it even further to ensure that they really were looking at this period of infancy and its connection to mental health in a holistic way. So what is infant mental health involved? If somebody works in the field of infant mental health, what does that mean? It means that we are really experts. We're interested in development. So we're looking at child development a lot. We're looking at the development of infants in the context of family systems. We're looking at the psychopathology of infancy and toddlers, and what are some of the difficulties that we see often related to attachment. Maybe it's looking in the issues of safeguarding. There's a lot of research going on even looking at things like medical trauma. So those babies that are given life-saving medical care, but in the process are separated from moms. And so a lot of the work, a lot of the practices now that you might find in a NICU, the skin-to-skin bonding, moms holding and talking, a lot of that has come out of the research of infant mental health that says, no, we need to do this stuff. We can't put a premature baby in the NICU separated from mom. Yes, it's good in terms of meeting their physiological or their medical needs in the moment, but their mental health needs are not helped by it. And so policies and strategies have been developed to make sure that while we're prioritizing life-saving medical care, it's not at the expense of the development of good mental health and psychological well-being. And so it's really meaningful research that's contributing pretty substantially to the way that we understand infancy and early childhood. So we focus a lot on interventions, preventions, and both like therapeutic interventions and then preventative interventions, because in any field of psychology, we're looking to treat when there is a problem, but we're also looking to understand what we can do to prevent a problem from developing. And that's a really important branch or color of the rainbow if we think of infant mental health as a rainbow. We're looking at parent and caregiver education. So how is it that we support parents and caregivers to understand child development, to understand issues of attachment, to know how to nurture and foster good infant mental health? We're also looking in this field at professional education and knowledge exchange, and how do we make sure that our social workers and our early childhood educators and our lactation consultants and our psychologists and our midwives and our aunts and uncles and everybody in our community understands the importance of this. And so one of the things that I really love is early educator education and parent education. And so that's a branch definitely within the field that I'm quite interested in. And we always want to look at cultural and biological influences. We know that parenting across the world is highly influenced by sociocultural factors. And so we have to consider culture in the context of infant mental health always. And I think that's one of the things I also love, because we live in such a diverse cultural community, is that I have an opportunity to learn about different parenting practices, family structures, belief systems, and in turn get to support a lot of families that can teach me as I help them. So infant and early mental health refers really to the set of practices, experiences, and conditions, birth to 5. Sometimes it stretches up to 6, during which a child can achieve optimal social, emotional, and cognitive development. And I think what's really important here is that we often sort of start to think of what the child needs when they hit school, right? So they get their eyes tested to start kindergarten. They get their immunizations when they start kindergarten. We start to sort of keep tabs on them when they start kindergarten. And what we really know in terms of neuroscience and brain development is that a big chunk of life's outcomes have already been determined or set in motion long before the child gets into school. That period of birth to 5 is critical for development, for the outcome of all of these things: social, emotional, and cognitive development. The goals of infant mental health are really to promote well-being and healthy development of infants and young children. It's a pretty big goal. It sounds a little vague, but it really encompasses all of those aspects we've covered with the rainbow. We want to make sure that we are building healthy brain architecture, so that's drawing from the field of neuroscience, to really understand what kind of environments and what kind of relationships and what kind of experiences build healthy brains. We want to ensure that children have access to what we call responsive relationships. We want to reduce and buffer sources of stress. We all experience stress, and stress in some forms is actually healthy for kids because it helps to build their capacity to cope, their resilience. But too much stress obviously is not good for their systems and their developing brains and bodies. And so how do we reduce those if we can? And how do we buffer them if they are sources of stress that we can't get rid of? We want to focus also on developing executive functions. I know we talk a lot about that sometimes in the field of psychology when we're looking at things like academics and social and emotional well-being. But really the foundation, again, is this is anchored in early childhood. This is our 0 to 5 years of brain development. We are sort of looking at executive functioning, self-regulation capacities that start with self-regulation of parents and caregivers, and how does this all interconnect? And so there's a lot of factors. Brain architecture is a core concept in infant mental health because it sort of conjures up this idea that brains are built as opposed to being born. And we think of, yes, all the structures of the brain are intact at birth, typically, unless there is something that's happened and maybe the brain has not developed fully. But the structures of the brain in healthy infants are all there at birth, but they are not connected. And so the structures of the brain are sort of like a house without any electrical wiring, right? So the structure is there, everything is there and set up, but it's not connected. And it's the interconnection that comes out of experiences during infancy. And the experiences and the quality of them and the type of experiences that they have really determine the quality of the wiring, the architecture of that brain structure. How strong are the connections? And so we start to see that infant mental health really has so much to do with learning and academics and social well-being and psychological functioning and adult mental health down the line. We also look at what we call epigenetics, which is sort of the intersection between genes and our environment or our experiences. So we know that genes provide the blueprint for all of human existence, and the color of our eyes, the color of our hair, our predisposition for maybe certain illnesses. There is this sort of like genetic blueprint that we're all born with. and experiences determine the connection between the brain structures. And what we know is because the brain is sort of, humans are social. We're very social. The brain then is a very social organ. And so how is it that genes and the expression of genes are influenced by the connections, the relationships, the experiences, the stress that an infant experiences during this key period of brain development? And what we know is that some stresses in early childhood, prolonged stresses, very toxic stresses, can actually change the DNA structure in an adaptive kind of responsive way. And then therefore that DNA gets passed on to the next generation. Newborns come into this world with a highly impressionable neurological system. They are vulnerable. They're unable to regulate their physical and emotional states independently. We see that. They cry when they're hungry. They shiver. They are very, very vulnerable at birth and are completely dependent on the adults around them for their survival. Without adult intervention, infant humans don't survive. They cannot survive without other adult humans to care for them. Babies are dependent completely on caregivers to help them not only live and survive, but to develop their neurological capacities, to grow the brain. And it's the connection between the adult caregiver and the infant that really is where the magic of infant mental health happens. We think of this as a critical period. There's a lot of research organizations that focus just on this, 0 to 5, 0 to 3, 0 to 6 in some parts of the world, but it really is this global recognition that this is a critical period of child development and long-term psychological well-being. And really what we know is that there's this it is essentially a period of immense opportunity, but it is also equally a period of incredible vulnerability. And so nurtured, supported, given good nutrition, a safe and consistent environment with lots of opportunities to explore and learn, that's an incredible opportunity to maximize a brain's potential. We also know that, difficulty in that environment, disruption or ruptures in that relationship system that infants have create a vulnerability like no other vulnerability or point in time in a child's life. Okay, I'm going to show you this quick video and then we'll be back. I think I'm going to show you this quick video. Maybe not. Okay, we're going to move on, and I'm going to come back and see if I can link this video into the summary or into the description of this video. What's critical to all of this, which maybe has become evident as I've been talking, is really the quality of that responsive caregiver relationship. This is probably the most critical piece of infant mental health, and it's where a lot of effort and research and support and interventions and prevention efforts are put in terms of supporting parents and caregivers to understand what a responsive relationship is, how to have it, what does that look like, because we know that that is really what is most critical for good brain development and lays the foundation of good mental health. Nothing is a guarantee, right? You can eat all of your vegetables and eat super healthy and still get sick. And we can still have mental illness because, remember, it's the connection between sort of the environmental and relationship pieces, but also our genetics. And so what we do know is that there's no sort of foolproof, but what we know is that this increases the likelihood for good mental health. what's really critical in that is something called serve and return interactions. And if you take anything away from this talk tonight, it really is that concept right there. Serve and return interactions is sort of like a tennis match. I serve to you and you return it to me. And then I send it back to you and you send it back to me. And that really is the foundation of relationships. A baby coos and, mama goes, oh, hi there. And baby smiles and mama says, oh, that's a beautiful smile. And this is a serve and return relationship. Baby points and daddy looks to see what baby's pointing at, and they have a conversation about whatever it is that baby has pointed at. This constant serve and return interaction is really what develops the connectivity between regions of the brain during the period of 0 to 5, and it's what helps to teach baby things like trust, things like protection, the relationship, the consistency. The ability to soothe oneself comes from having been soothed. So when baby cries, which is a serve, and then somebody responds and returns by picking baby up and comforts them or feeds them or changes their diaper or entertains them or bounces them, they're learning to communicate and they're learning that their needs in the world are going to be met. This is a great video, and let's see if I can get it to play. Okay, again, I'm going to link these two videos into the description of this video so that you can circle back and watch it. This is a video looking at 5 steps of building serve and return. And it's a fantastic video because it really does focus on what are some very simple things that parents and caregivers can do to foster and to facilitate serve and return. And it's things like being tuned in. So if you're attentive to baby and baby points or grabs at something, or a toddler makes a noise and holds something up to show you, and you're attending to baby and you're present and see it, then you can return that serve. You can have a chat about it. We're distracted a lot as parents. We're busy. We're rushing. Then often we miss those serves. And so setting time aside, being really attentive and tuned into baby and to young toddlers is really important. Another thing that's really important for serve and return is to label and name what it is that you see baby looking at. So if a baby points at the tree, you could say, it's a tree. If a baby holds up their hands because they want to be picked up, you could say, oh, mama, pick up. So serve and return is another great way to start to build the foundation of language. These are sort of three tips for serve and return for really doing this well. The first one is tune in, like I'd said, to the child's cues. Children serve with eye gazes, with gestures, with facial expressions, with sounds. I think we've all been in a grocery store and then there's like a baby or a toddler in the cart beside us and they kind of give us a look or they wave at us. So that's a serve, right? They've sort of said, hey, I see you. I want to kind of interact with you a little bit. And then most people will kind of go, hey, baby, having a good time shopping. We'll say something, and then we carry on our way. That's a great example of being tuned in to be able to see and notice the serve that baby's given you. Then we want to think about what the baby is trying to communicate, or the child, the early childhood, the young child, what they're trying to communicate. Are they pointing? Are they crying? Are they gesturing? Are they handing us something? What is it that this serve is meant to tell us, show us, get from us? And so if we're tuning in and we're thinking about what is it that the baby or the toddler is trying to tell us, then we can respond in a way that is sensitive. And we call it a sensitive response because it's, we're paying attention. We're sensitive to what it is that the baby is telling us. If we see a 2-year-old, if a 2-year-old comes up to me and they're babbling and they hand me something, they hand me a toy, I'm I'm tuned into that so I see it, and I'm going to think about what they're trying to communicate. They're probably trying to communicate that they need help in some way with that toy, that they want me to play with them with that toy. And so a response that would be considered sensitive might be, wow, look at this toy. Let's see what this toy does. Let me open this toy for you. Let me turn this toy. Let me bounce this thing. Let me stack whatever it is that the baby's brought you. So it's responding in a way that lets baby know, I got you. I know what you need. I think I understand what you're trying to say to me. And why is this important? Like, really, what does this matter all that much, right? The baby is 2. I'm cooking and I'm busy. Why does this really matter? It does really matter. That's the magic, I think, of 0 to 3 or 0 to 5 and this field of infant mental health, is that something so small has such profound capacity to shape the long-term outcome of that baby well into adulthood. And so it is, just paying attention and noticing and responding in a sensitive way. And it's amazing. What we know is that caregiver relationships and serve and return create security and safety and ultimately stress regulation. And there is so much talk nowadays about social and emotional well-being and social and emotional programs in primary school and self-regulation. And what we know is that really the foundation of this is built in the first 5 years. And so we need to understand that, yes, this is just tuning in and thinking about what your toddler's trying to say and responding in a way that lets the baby or the toddler know that you got them. You know what it is that they're trying to say, what it is that they need, or what it is that they want. That action repeated over and over and over again, hundreds of times during the course of a baby's first few years, is really what forms the foundation of good mental health throughout a lifetime. And so when we think of serve and return, we think of it as a small action, but repeated every single day creates security and safety that children need to be able to successfully navigate stress that's going to come their way. We know that children are going to face adversity. We cannot, nor should we, try to create a world in which children don't have challenges. Challenges help children to build their capacity to believe in themselves, their ability to persevere when things get hard, their ability to try, to get up the ladder, to figure out that math problem, to solve that situation with their friend, to be able to, cope when they didn't get picked for the team. We know that life's challenges are coming and we want them to be ready, fortified for those. And so we know that they need a stress regulation system that is well prepared. Infants have 4 identifiable biological states. They have what's called deep sleep, light sleep, active alert, and quiet alert. And each state serves an essential function for growth and development. And it's through predictable and sensitive and responsive care that infants regulate their biological states and can feel safe in their environments. And state regulation creates an optimal biophysical environment for brain development. A sense of well-being builds secure attachments and a connection that sets the stage for social and emotional learning. And I think what's really interesting about this is that these can correspond in some ways to baby's temperament, right? And we have, those babies that we think of as really easy, and then we think of those babies that are a little bit more challenging, right? Some babies are deep sleepers. Bless you if you have one. I did not. Some babies spend less time in deep sleep and more time in light sleep, which means they wake up easy. Some babies have more sort of active alert. Eyes are open and they are on the go. Other babies are, they have more time spent sort of in quiet alert. And it's really not that any of these are better, but it's how is the caregiver responding to them in each of those times, right? and you've got a baby who's a light sleeper and really active, and mom's probably going to get super frustrated because she's really tired and she's got to go to work and she hasn't slept much. And so now all of a sudden we see maybe a parent-child connection that isn't necessarily really tuned in and isn't maybe very responsive because it's hard. And so this is where our supportive services, this is where our social networks and social supports make a really big difference for parents and caregivers during this period of time. I want to just talk a little bit about types of stress. I've probably mentioned stress quite a few times in this presentation, and we don't think of stress as things like, bank loans and traffic, although those certainly are absolutely stressful things. A stress could also be a social stress. So it could be poverty, it could be living in, hurricane season where we all kind of feel this low grade impending stress about, the weather. And what we know is that we kind of really like to be calm and regulated. These are our sort of green, faces with smileys and bright eyes. And so the goal is for children and infants and parents to be regulated and calm, connected. But we also know that we're going to have stress throughout our life. Positive stress are these short periods of maybe delayed response in the context of serve and return, in the context of early childhood caregiving. These might be the periods when we can't get to baby when they're crying, right? We're attending to other children, or we've got something hot on the stove, so it's not safe to pick baby up right this second while I've got oven mitts on and I'm holding like a pan of boiling lasagna. So baby is stressed, baby's crying, baby's telling me, hey, pick me up, please pick me up. I'm hungry, I'm not happy, I'm wet, and I can't get to her or him because I've got this pan of lasagna that I need to get out of the oven and I need to make sure that it's safely set down before I can go and pick baby up. And so these are these short periods of distress. This might even be when we go to work, right? Or baby's left for a period of time with another caregiver. So I'm going to go out for a night with some friends, and my 2-year-old is crying when I'm leaving because they don't want me to leave, right? So that is stressful for babies. It isn't bad for babies if I come home, right? It's bad for babies if that primary caregiver leaves and doesn't come back, right? Or says they're coming back and doesn't. And if that happens consistently, or so that they can't count on you to come back reliably. But to go out, have an evening and then come back, that's what we call positive stress. These are short periods of waiting for things. These are short periods of, being distressed. But what happens is that when that reconnection happens, then that's actually the point in which attachment develops, right? So attachment is not, you're going to be here 24 hours a day and never leave my sight. Attachment is, I know that even when you are not around, you are coming back. I know that even when I go to school, you are going to be there for me. I know that even when I can't have my needs met immediately, I know they're going to be met eventually because I can trust you. I feel safe and secure in our relationship. Now, obviously, baby isn't thinking all those things, but their body is experiencing it. And so positive stress can actually be quite healthy for babies. And I know sometimes parents will talk to me about things that they really worry about, that in the context of understanding how experiences of positive stress can actually strengthen babies' brain architecture. It can be that repetitive, consistent, trustworthy response that helps baby develop attachment. Tolerable stress, moving schools, losing a parent, these are things, no fun. Nobody likes this. But these are tolerable stresses. And what tolerable stress means is that, this is when your favorite nursery teacher leaves, or you have to change schools, or your pet dies. and you're really, really upset, or grandma dies. And these are really, really hard things for young children to go through. But what we know is with a strong supportive relationship around them, these can be, again, things that can help them develop their capacity to cope later in life and develop that robust mental health that they're going to need to be able to regulate and modulate themselves and their emotions and their response to things later on in adolescence and in adulthood. Now, toxic stress is the stuff we want to avoid. Toxic stress is prolonged exposure to stress, prolonged activation of that part of your brain that tells you you are in danger. And we know that, when we get that shock or we're in danger, there's almost a car accident, there's a hurricane coming, it really revs up our whole entire physiological and neurological system. And we can withstand those temporary elevations of extreme stress if we have good brain architecture. But what happens with toxic stress is when it doesn't ever turn on, it's sort of like the fire alarm that is stuck in the on position, and it's unrelenting. And so because the stress never ends, the fear of the danger that the infant or the young child experience never ends. And so their brain is never allowed to go back to a state of regulatory calm, a state of security, a state of feeling comforted. And these are things that happen, prolonged neglect and abuse. So that baby who just, no matter how much they're crying or signaling their parent or serving to the adults around them, they are not having the return come. These are children who witness violence, live in poverty, experience homelessness. So we think of consistency and predictability as really good for brain development. And unfortunately, some children are, moving houses every other week because of, housing insecurity. And so toxic stress, we know, is incredibly damaging for young brains. This graphic shows sort of 3 states of the brain. There's the sort of the survival state, right? That's the brainstem that says, this is the survival. This is the part of the brain that kicks in when it's all about survival. The emotional state is the limbic system. This is kind of like our arousal, our emotional response system. This tells us that we're loved, that we're cared for, that we're important, that these people around me are good. I can trust them. They always come back. They feed me when I'm hungry. They play with me. They tickle me. They just I like to be around them. And then the executive state is sort of, what can I learn from this experience? And what we know is that the brain develops from the bottom to the top and the front to the back. So the structures at the bottom and the back are developing in utero first, and then the frontal lobes, or that green part, are developing last. And what we also know then is we know that the connectivity, right, the development of the brain happens during utero and pregnancy, and the connection of the regions of the brain happens during the first 5 years of life. And so not only is it the structure of the brain, but it is the connectivity. And we know that if the brain of the baby is always in that survival state, right, because there's abuse or there's severe neglect, or there's a great deal of instability, or they're living in an environment that's very violent, or a neighborhood where there's a great deal of poverty and people don't have enough food to eat, then they're never really able to move into that emotional state, and certainly not that executive state where they are able to learn, problem solve, decision make, be rational in their response to things. And so it does have real impacts. Infant mental health is really about understanding where an infant is based on their experiences, and then understanding what it is that they need in order to get them to an optimal state of well-being. So what are some risk factors in infant mental health that we would look for? We look for things like mental illness in the caregiver. A parent or a caregiver who's living with mental illness is is struggling to be able to regulate themselves, to manage their own experiences of emotions and thoughts and behaviors, and so more difficult to then be able to respond in a sensitive and consistent way to baby. And so what we know is that mothers and fathers with mental health problems need additional resources and support. And if we can bolster and buffer the support that that entire family unit gets, then we can ensure that that relationship is healthy and baby gets to thrive. A caregiver's own history of neglect and abuse can be a risk factor because we respond. Remember, I said the DNA can really be changed through our environmental experiences. And so we may wire through our own neglect the inability to really kind of tune in to emotional needs. And so when baby's crying, we aren't really tuned into that. So again, another reason why I think the presentation that Dr. Walton has done on perinatal mental health is really about making sure that we're taking really good care of moms and dads, birth moms and dads, adoptive moms and dads, foster moms and dads, grandma and grandpa moms and dads, so that they in turn can reduce the risk factors to the infant. Because what you're seeing is that risks to the infant are really about vulnerabilities in the adults around them. Single parenthood without social and emotional supports, a temperament mismatch. That was the alert state and the quiet state. If you've got a pretty chill mom and then you've got this super, super activated, alert, rowdy kid, that can really put a lot of pressure on mom. Or vice versa, you've got a super hype mom or dad who just likes to be like busy and on the go and a million things planned. And you've got this baby whose temperament is kind of in that quiet alert. They're quite happy to just be awake, but kind of doing their own quiet thing. And they've got this mom who always wants to be like dragging them around places and doing things that are loud and active and moving. Well, this temperament mismatch is something that in infant mental health we're often looking to assess when we're working with vulnerable parents, or if parents are reporting difficulties with that infant and soothing that infant. One of the things we want to look at is what is that temperament match between parent or caregiver and infant. Financial stress, we know that things like poverty and housing and food insecurity are humongous risk factors. It is really hard for a parent to be tuned in and sensitively responsive to a crying toddler when they are at the kitchen table trying to figure out how they're going to keep the lights on. Or they have to work 2 jobs in order to be able to pay for food. So it's really hard to be in a mental state yourself to be able to tune in and respond appropriately to this child. And what we often do is we judge those parents instead of judging the social structure that puts such an additional burden on them, and leaves them, really renders them, in a very, very vulnerable situation. And that then creates just added vulnerability to the child. Conflict between caregivers. We know that children that live in homes where there's lots of yelling and shouting and fighting, again, it's that safety thing, the fire alarm that's going off in their brain, that stress response. And so that's, can be quite toxic in terms of what we think of as stress. Parents are always going to have an argument. And seeing parents argue is not a bad thing for children if what they see then is that parents can keep themselves calm and regulated and apologize if they've said something that they, shouldn't have said. And they're seeing the repair. So children are seeing the argument, and then they're also seeing the repair of that. So they're learning that, this is how I respond. If sometimes I do lose my cool, I can repair this situation. So we don't want to, have massive fights and domestic violence. Those are huge risk factors, but also daily life is such that sometimes there is conflict. So it's how are the adults managing that so that the child is seeing this kind of like consistent, responsive accountability taking, really. Alcohol and drug abuse in any parent is a huge risk factor, and we know this. We know that these are the things that then put a child at risk for increased mental illness in adolescence, increased academic failure, increased involvement in the social criminal justice system. So we know that these same risk factors for infant mental health are often the exact same risk factors for adolescent mental health. And the field of infant mental health really is saying, hey, let's sort this out earlier. Let's get the right supports and the right interventions. Let's get this going. Let's get that path in the right direction so that we're not trying to have to fix this and figure this out when a child is 16 and 17. We've probably heard a lot about ACEs. ACEs are, it stands for the Adverse Childhood Experience, and it came out of some public health research, I want to say back in the 80s, that really was sort of revolutionary, and it changed the way public health looked at issues in children. It changed the way we in education looked at children. It changed certainly in psychology the way that we understood things like trauma. And so it really was hugely influential, sort of seminal piece of research that, even though it was looking at public health, had implications in so many other disciplines and infant mental health as well. And what we know is that adverse childhood experiences, many of which I just would have read on the other page, things like addiction in the family or a loss of a parent, those are adversities that we obviously want to buffer children from. All children are going to experience some of them because none of us have a life that is free of adversity or difficulty. But what we know is that this kind of graphic goes a little bit deeper than the ACE study itself, which really just looked at household adversity. So it looked at the level one there, the tree, right? So divorce, homelessness, parental mental illness, domestic violence, any abuse that a child receives, physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, maternal depression, bullying, incarceration of a family member, loss of a family member, like a parent to death or divorce or absenteeism. So these are massive adversities. But what we know is that adversity goes much deeper than that, right? And so adversity, we look then at what is community adversity. And so we look at this as kind of like the roots, right? This is the roots of any family system, any community system. And these are things like poverty and racism, historical trauma, discrimination, bias, substandard school systems, community violence, lack of community resources, right? And so you've got a child who has a couple of, adversities in their household, but they live in poverty in a community that there is no green space, there is no safe playground. Well, now all of a sudden you've got a kid who's at much greater risk than the exact same kid who lived with the exact same household adversities, but lived in a community where they had plenty of food. They didn't worry about safety walking to the park, and they had a beautiful park or access to green space and access to safe community resources. And so we start to see that this issue of, ACEs and risk factors is quite complicated. It's what the child is experiencing in their home, but it's also then what is that family system experiencing in their community. And then to make it even more complicated, there can be environmental adversities, right? And we live in the Caribbean, which means we face lots of environmental adversities. We have these hurricanes that come rolling through that put incredible stress on our systems, that put incredible stress on our children. We've recently had earthquakes and pandemics. Some children live where there is, mudslides and tornadoes and wildfires. And so these environmental things can be extremely distressing to children. They hear it, they see the adults around them get all stressed out, they see the community around them get all stressed out. Sometimes they see the community around them get damaged. And so this creates kind of our understanding of what are the adversities that children are facing. And the field of infant mental health is very much concerned in advocating, one, preventing and intervening when there are family adversities, but also advocating when there are social adversities, to make sure that we are trying to not only resource a family, but resource communities. So good mental health requires consistent, responsive caregivers with primary responsive relationships with primary caregivers, but primary caregivers need systems of support so that they have the mental health needs met to provide babies with responsive caregiving. And so infant mental health really is maternal and paternal and parental and community mental health, because if we want to take good care of babies and young children, we need parents who are equipped and have the capacity to do that. So if you're in medical field or the pediatric field or early childhood, you can be part of what we sort of think of as surveillance and referral, right? So we're always looking at babies, infant physical health. We've all got the growth chart and we've got the apps on our phone, and we're always weighing them and how long are they, and we track these kinds of things very carefully, right? We also track developmental milestones way more vigorously and with way more consistency and way better tools now than we did, say, 20 years ago. And so we are tracking not only sort of physical health and growth, but we're tracking developmental milestones. But equally important, but often not considered when we're thinking of child, well baby checks, or we're looking at, school admission screening, we're looking at standard child health and well-being, is we're often missing this really critical period of mental health attachment and infant caregiver relationship. And this, I think, in our community is lacking, this ability to assess for this vulnerability, because if we can identify this vulnerability early, just like we've done a great job of identifying developmental milestone delays early, we identify all kinds of health issues early. When we can identify early, we can intervene early, and then we can change the trajectory of somebody's life. And the same with this issue of infant mental health. So looking and understanding and assessing and being aware of and tuned into the needs of not only mom, not only baby, but the relationship between mom and baby, and that responsiveness, that interconnection, that serve and return, what is happening there in those moments between baby and toddler and caregiver. So again, this is a great video that's not going to play. I'm going to definitely pop all of these into the description, so you should be able to log out of this video and go to the description and see these links. But basically, the video is sort of focusing on this fact that we all have a role to play as members, whether it is that you are a mental health professional, you're an early childhood educator, you're a pediatrician, you're a parent, you're a foster parent, you're a grandma, but we're all members of this community. And so if we understand the adversities that exist in our society and we can do something about them, then we have a role to play. If we can support a parent or a family that we know is facing some adversity, then we're making a difference in the life of that infant. And so I think if we start to think collectively and we start to think relationally and we start to really understand that infant mental health is this incredible time of opportunity for growth and caretaking, then we can reduce the vulnerabilities that also exist during this period of early childhood. And that's my presentation. I hope you found it helpful. I hope you have some takeaways that you can leave here with. If you scan the QR code that's currently on the screen right now, then you can leave some feedback about what you thought about this presentation. You can leave some feedback about ideas or comments. You can also let us know if you have any suggestions for other topics that you'd like to learn a bit more about in our sort of endeavor to provide our community with mental health information that is accessible to everybody in these kinds of forums. So again, my name is Shannon Seymour. I'm the director at the Wellness Center, and I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. Have a great rest of your day or evening, whatever time it is that you're watching this. Take care.